So our next speaker is Mercedes Lee from No One's Illegal, who's going to talk about a lot of people who are sort of under the radar and forgotten here.
No One is Illegal Toronto is a group of immigrants, refugees, and allies who fight for the rights of all migrants to live with dignity and respect. We believe that granting citizenship to a privileged few is part of racist immigration and border policies designed to exploit and marginalize migrants. So we work to oppose these policies as well as the broader international economic systems that create the conditions of war, climate catastrophe, and poverty that force migration. At the same time, it is part of our crucial component. It is part of our ongoing work to support and build alliances with Indigenous peoples in their fight against colonialism, displacement, and the ongoing occupation of their land. So we organize around 3 pillars. Our 3 pillars are access without fear, status for all, and Indigenous sovereignty. Our demands are an end to all detentions and deportations, the implementation of a full regularization program for non-status people, which is also known as status for all or status on arrival, access without fear to essential services for non-status people, an end to the hyper-exploitation of temporary migrant workers and laborers, and the reassertion of Indigenous sovereignty. So all our organizing and our analysis is grounded in this. So what does the current terrain of our struggle look like? Currently, we are fighting a war on multiple fronts. So on the one hand, we have the slippery kind of sunny days facade of a Trudeau federal government. And on the other hand, we have the normalization of the ultra-right and a mainstream media that is kind of complicit in giving the far right a platform. And together, these are working together to erode and overwhelm resistance and undermine a radical vision of transformation rooted in the principles of freedom to move, return, and stay for all peoples. So let's be very clear here. All these fronts are anti-immigrant. The federal government stages photo ops to welcome refugees, but in reality, for a country of our size, economic status, we take in a minuscule amount. Organizing by immigration detainees, which has included numerous hunger strikes, some of which involved people going without food for 60 days, has resulted in victories. We are seeing less people being detained, and people who are detained for shorter amounts of time. However, under Trudeau, in response to this kind of organizing and pressure from immigration detainees and their allies, and immigration detainees are people who are without status, who have come to the attention of the state, who are apprehended and then put in prison if they cannot be deported. So in response to this organizing, the government has allotted a staggering $138 million to expand immigration detention centers, multiply the forms of detention and surveillance, and use more kinder forms of punishment in order to appear more progressive on immigration. So what we're seeing is that this is a federal government that is extremely crafty, which is in stark contrast to our organizing under the Harper government, which was very explicit in the fact that they didn't give a shit. So hunger striking detainees don't make for great selfie opportunities for JT. So instead, we get ankle bracelet monitoring and voice recognition phone check-ins. So instead of imprisoning people behind the classic, prisons or behind bars, the government turns everything into prison. Everywhere is a prison. For those deemed undesirable, there are limited pathways to status. So then you have also the increasing appeals to a right-wing populism that facilitates the fascist creep that we are seeing right now, where Doug Ford is bolstering and emboldening the white nationalist contingent that has always made up the settler colony. Fascist language, often disguised by populist appeals to the people, and the existence of fascism is being normalized at an overwhelming pace. So the city has never been safe for our undocumented neighbors, friends, and family. Our struggles have made it safer, but we have to continuously work together to protect these slender gains. So what we're finding now that this is even more so, and the masked neoliberalism of the federal government plays tag team with the naked racism of the provincial government. So the federal government lulls us with their optics and fake consultations, and then we're slow to react when the provincial government comes in like a battering ram. And I think we're seeing this on multiple fronts. So all this is happening in combination with the left that has been weakened by the application of a rigid perversion of identity politics. Fracturing as a result of this rigidity leads to barriers to building the cross-issue, multiracial, broad coalitions and the long-term resilient organizations we need to be able to direct people after the marches and rallies are done. Thank you. So I painted a pretty grim picture. I'd like to share with you a story from No One Is Illegal Toronto's own organizing history with valuable lessons that we can take forward in our struggles. So in 2004, immigration officers entered Dante Alighieri High School in Toronto, here. They walked into 16-year-old Kimberly Lozano Sosa's classroom and arrested her. They then went into her 14-year-old brother Gerald's homeroom and arrested him. Kimberly and Gerald were dragged from their classroom by CBSA, Canada Border and Service Agency agents, and thrown in a van. Already in the van was their mother, their grandmother, and their Canadian-born baby sister. Students who saw this arrest were understandably terrified, enraged, and incensed. Quickly, a few of them got online and somehow got in touch with us and No One Is Illegal. A few hours later, members of our collective met with them, showed up at the school. Teachers, students, and parents had gathered together. They wanted to do something. Together, we decided to organize a demonstration the next day at the jail where the children were being held. Hundreds of people showed up at the Immigration Detention Center in Rexdale. We organized an even bigger rally the day after. With the news of these arrests, where they were plastered on the front pages of newspapers across the country, the federal government went into damage control mode. So Kimberly and Gerald were released from prison. Kimberly stepped out to her supporters and dozens of TV cameras, and a reporter asked her, "How do you feel?" And Kimberly responded, "It's not just about me. There are all these children inside this prison. Why aren't they in school?" So with these simple words, Kimberly, unbeknownst to her and to us, launched the Access Without Fear Solidarity City campaign and movement that continues today, 14 years later. With Kimberly and Gerald and hundreds of other Torontonians, we went to the TDSB and asked for changes. We demanded that the school board create policies to ensure that undocumented students could access schools without fear, and immigration enforcement would not be allowed to enter into schools. The school board initially resisted our campaign. That year, Kimberly and Gerald took a rally of 5,000 people down Bloor Street, calling for immigration justice. The school board trustees told us, insisted to us, that they were afraid to tell school board staff to break laws. As we explained to them over and over, the laws, their job is not to uphold immigration laws, but rather to deliver education. When the school board were refusing to discuss the issue, parents, teachers, students, and supporters began weekly protests outside school board headquarters. Faced with this constant pressure, the school board eventually decided to debate the motion. With the room packed with activist organizers wearing "Don't Ask, Don't Tell" pins, school board trustees, noting which way the wind was blowing, voted unanimously to make Toronto schools accessible to undocumented students and to refuse to allow immigration enforcement into schools. It wasn't just the school boards, but even immigration enforcement, which had initially defended its actions, issued a statement saying that they would not enter schools. So from this story, there are multiple lessons I want to share with you that can provide guidance in these times. Sanctuary zones, solidarity zones, are about shutting out immigration enforcement and about creating real and effective policies that allow people to access essential services and live lives without fear. These spaces can be cities, they can be provinces, they can be the whole country, but they start with local organizations and community groups. They require building solidarity amongst and between frontline service providers and those requiring access to these services. Mass mobilizations and direct action are the only way to win real change. We must be led by the needs of our communities. Every one of our campaigns emerged out of a specific incident where undocumented people were targeted. And all of them were led in part by undocumented families themselves. And because they had immediate material impact on the lives of people, many of them have succeeded. Policy is not worth the paper it's printed on without people power behind it forcing it to be implemented. We see every time we make a gain in policy, it's like walked back with subsequent years, and we have to keep fighting every single time. Access without fear ultimately is not about government policy. It's a culture of solidarity where each of us works to ensure that everyone in our community can get basic services, rights, and dignity. So what started at a grassroots level, built up slowly, with lessons learned the hard way, has to now be shared. We have to encourage as many people as possible across the country to build safe zones for undocumented people in their cities, which shut out immigration enforcement. So our work critically is not just about, has to be about cultural change. It's about transforming society in a way where immigrants and migrants are no longer dehumanized.